Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah, and I'm excited to take you on a journey back to one of the most pivotal moments in history, World War I. Together, we'll uncover the causes, the battles, and the aftermath of a war that changed the world forever. Get ready to learn, reflect, and improve your English along the way. Let's begin. Imagine a world teetering on the edge, brimming with ambition, competition, and silent tension. By 1914, Europe was a ticking time bomb. Nationalist fervor gripped entire populations, imperial ambitions drove powerful nations to expand, and alliances, both secret and public, formed a delicate web across the continent. One event, a single gunshot, would light the fuse, unleashing destruction on an unprecedented scale. This was World War I, a conflict so vast and devastating that it changed the course of history forever. Before the war, there were signs everywhere: rising tensions, growing military arsenals, and diplomatic maneuvering that hinted at an impending catastrophe. Yet, few could have imagined the scale of the destruction that awaited. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was the spark, but it was decades of underlying conflicts and political miscalculations that turned this into a global conflict. The war that followed was unlike anything the world had seen before. It wasn't just a political struggle between empires, it was a human catastrophe that reshaped entire societies. Millions would fight and die, cities would be reduced to rubble, and empires would crumble. What began as a regional conflict in the Balkans quickly spiraled into a world war that engulfed continents and shattered generations. The story of World War I is one of ambition, tragedy, and transformation. It's a tale filled with complex motives, dramatic turns, and human resilience that can teach us timeless lessons. This war wasn't just a political catastrophe. It was a profound human crisis that forced nations and individuals to confront their limitations and their capacity for endurance. In examining its lessons, we see the importance of diplomacy, the dangers of unchecked nationalism, and the necessity of remembering history to prevent its repetition. The echoes of World War I resonate in modern conflicts, warning us of the cost of power struggles and the resilience required to rebuild from devastation. In every tragedy, however, there is a seed of rebirth, and World War I was no exception, a turning point that reshaped nations and planted the roots of a different, though still fragile, world order. But this war wasn't just about politics and battlefields. It was a profoundly human tragedy, a conflict that touched every corner of life and left no family, community, or nation unscathed. It tore apart empires, shattered cities, and erased generations, leaving a world struggling to piece itself back together. Millions of lives were lost, countless dreams were buried beneath the mud of battlefields, and the echoes of sorrow reverberated across continents. In this story, we'll take you beyond the headlines and explore the human side of World War I. We'll follow the path from the assassination that lit the spark to the alliances that fanned the flames. We'll walk through the trenches where soldiers fought for mere inches of ground, witness the pivotal battles that shaped the conflict, and examine how the war changed the world forever. Along the way, we'll uncover not just the military strategies and political maneuvers, but also the personal stories of hope, loss, and survival that defined a generation. Today, We invite you on this gripping journey into the heart of history, how it began, how it unfolded, and how its echoes still shape our lives. In the early 20th century, Europe was a patchwork of powerful nations locked in a delicate balance, each vying for dominance in an increasingly volatile world. The major players, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, France, and Britain, watched each other with suspicion, their relationships riddled with distrust and strategic maneuvering. Diplomatic negotiations were often conducted in secrecy, fostering a climate of paranoia and misunderstanding. Secret alliances promised mutual defense, but they also laid the groundwork for a catastrophic chain reaction. These agreements, designed to deter conflict, instead created a dangerous domino effect that would soon plunge the world into chaos. Meanwhile, a relentless arms race heightened the stakes, with each nation building vast armies and modern navies to prepare for the inevitable. Military innovations such as advanced artillery, rapid-firing rifles, and dreadnought battleships transformed the nature of warfare, making it deadlier than ever before. At the heart of this tension was a growing competition for global influence. Germany's rapid industrialization and ambition to expand its colonial holdings threatened Britain's long-standing dominance. France, still smarting from its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, sought to reclaim its lost prestige. In Eastern Europe, Austria-Hungary struggled to maintain control over its diverse and restive populations, while Russia saw itself as the protector of Slavic nations, frequently clashing with Austrian interests in the Balkans. Nationalism surged across the continent, becoming both a unifying force and a cause of division. In multi-ethnic empires like Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, ethnic groups such as the Serbs, Croats, and Czechs pushed for greater autonomy or outright independence. Their demands were often met with brutal repression, fueling resentment and revolutionary fervor. These simmering tensions created a volatile political landscape where any small spark could ignite a conflagration. As tensions mounted, Europe became a powder keg waiting for a spark. Diplomatic efforts to maintain peace became increasingly desperate, but often failed due to mistrust and conflicting agendas among the great powers. The leaders of Europe were caught in a complex web of alliances, each entangled by promises of mutual defense and driven by their own ambitions. Every diplomatic meeting became a battlefield of words and negotiations, filled with veiled threats and strategic maneuvering. Competing interests ensured that even minor incidents could escalate into a crisis. The question was no longer if war would come, it was when and under what circumstances it would begin. Some hoped diplomacy could avert the disaster, but most were prepared for conflict. The world braced itself for an eruption that seemed inevitable, knowing that the next move might unleash a catastrophe far beyond anything they could control. Behind the scenes, imperial rivalries added fuel to the growing tensions. The major powers sought to expand their influence across Africa, Asia, and the Balkans, leading to fierce competition for colonies and strategic territories. Germany's rapid industrial growth and military expansion threatened Britain's naval supremacy and France's colonial ambitions, creating an atmosphere of paranoia and rivalry. Russia's ambitions in the Balkans clashed directly with Austria-Hungary's desire to maintain control over its Slavic territories, further straining relations. Meanwhile, nationalism surged across Europe, becoming a powerful force that both united and divided nations. In the multi-ethnic empires like Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, ethnic groups such as the Serbs, Croats, and Czechs demanded greater autonomy or complete independence. These demands created volatile internal pressures, with nationalist movements often resorting to acts of violence and rebellion to achieve their goals, further destabilizing an already fragile Europe. It was a world brimming with ambition, imperial rivalries, and unresolved grievances. Nationalist movements stirred unrest in the multi-ethnic empires of Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, while the arms race continued to escalate. Political leaders walked a fine line, aware that any wrong move could trigger an international crisis. As tensions grew, diplomats scrambled to maintain peace, but their efforts often fell short, mired in secrecy and mistrust. It became increasingly clear that Europe was sitting on a powder keg, where a single spark could ignite a global catastrophe. The only question was when and how it would explode. It was a world ready for war, simmering with unresolved rivalries and nationalist fervor. The empires braced themselves for conflict, their militaries fully mobilized, their populations infused with patriotic zeal. The only question left was when, and under what pretext, the inevitable explosion would occur. It was not just about power. It was a battle for survival, a contest of pride and ambition that had been brewing for decades. Soon, the balance would tip and the world would be engulfed in flames. On June 28, 1914, the streets of Sarajevo were vibrant with anticipation, filled with the sound of marching bands and the fluttering of flags in the warm summer breeze. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, had arrived in the city with his wife, Sophie, for an official visit meant to strengthen ties and assert imperial presence in a region simmering with nationalist unrest. The couple traveled in an open-top car, smiling and waving to the crowds lining the cobblestone streets. Children held small flags, while curious onlookers craned their necks for a glimpse of royalty passing by, unaware that history was quietly converging on this fateful moment. Among the crowd stood Gavrilo Princip, a 19-year-old Serbian nationalist whose eyes burned with fervor and desperation. For him, this was more than an assassination. It was a revolutionary act that he believed could awaken his people and free them from Austro-Hungarian rule. Princip, a member of the secret organization known as the Black Hand, was driven by a deep sense of duty to his cause. Every step he took that day felt like a march toward destiny, his youthful idealism blinding him to the chaos his actions would unleash. With cold resolve and trembling hands, he waited for the perfect moment, knowing that this single act would reverberate through history, forever altering the fate of Europe. The first assassination attempt, a bomb thrown at the car, failed spectacularly, causing panic but leaving the royal couple unharmed. Franz Ferdinand's car sped away, leaving a shaken but determined Princip to regroup. Fate, however, had not yet abandoned his mission. Later that day, in an astonishing twist of chance, the Archduke's driver took a wrong turn, halting the vehicle directly in front of the cafe where Princip stood. Realizing his opportunity, the young assassin did not hesitate. His pulse quickened as he raised his pistol, took a deep breath, and fired two fatal shots. One bullet tore through Franz Ferdinand's neck, while the other struck Sophie in the abdomen. Chaos erupted as bystanders screamed and scattered. Within minutes, both the Archduke and his beloved wife lay lifeless, their blood soaking the car's leather seats, a single act that would ignite a global conflict. The assassination sent shockwaves across Europe, shaking the foundations of an already unstable continent. Austria-Hungary, outraged and determined to assert its dominance, issued an ultimatum to Serbia filled with harsh demands. Serbia's partial acceptance of these demands did little to calm the storm. Austria-Hungary declared war on July 28, 1914, believing it could swiftly subdue its smaller neighbor. However, the intricate web of alliances quickly transformed what could have been a localized conflict into a full-scale world war. Russia, bound by its Slavic ties and alliance with Serbia, mobilized its forces in defense. Germany, seeing Russia's actions as a direct threat, declared war on Russia and France. Within days, Europe was ablaze, and the Great War had begun. The assassination was just the spark. The true causes of World War I lay deeper, rooted in decades of political maneuvering, imperial competition, and a fragile web of alliances that ensured any regional conflict would escalate into a continental catastrophe. The complex network of treaties and mutual defense pacts created a dangerous situation where no single power could remain neutral without risking its strategic position. Ambitious empires, driven by nationalist fervor and colonial rivalry, stood poised for confrontation. Within weeks of the assassination, Europe was ablaze, each nation drawn into the conflict by a chain reaction of declarations of war. July 28, 1914, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia after issuing an ultimatum filled with severe demands. Though Serbia accepted most conditions, it rejected others, leading Austria-Hungary to act decisively. This declaration set the stage for a chain reaction that would pull the entire continent into war. August 1, 1914, Germany declared war on Russia, citing the mobilization of Russian forces as a direct threat to its security. The German leadership, under Kaiser Wilhelm II, believed a swift and decisive action was necessary to maintain its strategic advantage. What began as a precautionary move soon spiraled into full-scale war, as Germany prepared to confront not just Russia, but also its allies. August 3, 1914, Germany declared war on France and, as part of its strategic Schlieffen Plan, launched an invasion of neutral Belgium. The German military believed that quickly defeating France by bypassing its main defenses would allow them to avoid a prolonged two-front war with both France and Russia. The violation of Belgium's neutrality shocked the world and had immediate consequences, drawing Britain into the conflict. August 4, 1914, Britain declared war on Germany after Germany's violation of Belgium's neutrality. The British government, bound by its treaty obligations to protect Belgium, found itself with little choice but to act. Public opinion in Britain, already wary of German militarism, shifted decisively in favor of intervention. This marked the beginning of Britain's full-scale involvement in what would soon become a global conflict. Each declaration of war pulled more nations into the conflict, like dominoes falling in rapid succession. What started as a regional dispute between Austria-Hungary and Serbia quickly escalated, drawing in the world's major powers through a web of alliances and national interests. Germany's strategy to outmaneuver Russia and France set Europe ablaze, while Britain's intervention added a global dimension. Colonial empires in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East became new theaters of war, involving millions from distant lands. Within weeks, the world found itself engulfed in what would become known as the Great War, a conflict that would change the course of history forever. When the war began, many believed it would be over by Christmas. Propaganda posters painted the war as a noble adventure, enticing young men with promises of honor, camaraderie, and swift victory. Thousands of volunteers, eager to serve their countries, flooded recruitment stations with dreams of adventure and glory. Young men from all walks of life, farmers, students, and factory workers, left behind their homes, thinking they would return as heroes in a few short months. They had no idea what awaited them on the battlefields of Europe, the horror of trench warfare, the deafening roar of artillery, and the devastating toll on their bodies and minds. The romanticized vision of war quickly faded in the face of brutal reality. The reality of World War I shattered the romanticized notions of gallant charges and quick victories. This was a new kind of war, a brutal conflict defined by trenches that stretched for hundreds of miles, the relentless rattle of machine guns, and the suffocating terror of poison gas. For 4 long years, soldiers endured unimaginable hardship in a war that seemed to have no end, trapped in a deadly stalemate that consumed entire generations. The Western Front, which stretched from the North Sea through Belgium and northern France, became a brutal and unforgiving battleground. Soldiers lived and fought in trenches, deep, muddy, and infested with rats and disease. These trenches were not just shelters, they were prisons of misery, where men endured relentless artillery fire and sniper attacks daily. For months, they battled over mere inches of land, often sacrificing thousands of lives for gains that could be measured in feet. The terrain was a nightmare of churned-up earth and barbed wire, turning every advance into a harrowing struggle for survival. Life in the trenches was a nightmare beyond imagination. Soldiers endured freezing winters where frostbite was as deadly as bullets, and sweltering summers that turned the trenches into suffocating ovens. Mud was omnipresent, thick, clinging, and unrelenting, transforming every step into a struggle and every trench into a filthy, disease-ridden pit. Dysentery spread rapidly, exacerbated by the lack of clean water and the stench of decay. Rats, some as large as cats, thrived in these conditions, feasting on discarded rations and even the corpses of fallen soldiers. Sleep was a rare luxury, constantly interrupted by the threat of sniper fire, artillery bombardments, or sudden raids. Fear and exhaustion became constant companions, gnawing at the minds of the men who lived in this purgatory, day after day, with no end in sight. Shell shock, a condition we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, became alarmingly common among soldiers. It was not just a momentary reaction to danger, but a deep psychological wound inflicted by prolonged exposure to the relentless horrors of war. Symptoms ranged from uncontrollable tremors and nightmares to complete emotional withdrawal and mutism. Many soldiers experienced mental breakdowns, unable to cope with the constant barrage of artillery, the sight of death all around them, and the sheer terror of not knowing if they would survive the next hour. For some, recovery was possible, but for many others, these scars remained for the rest of their lives, profoundly altering their futures. In 1916, the Battle of Verdun became one of the most brutal and iconic battles of the war, symbolizing the relentless and grinding nature of World War I. The German strategy, devised by General Erich von Falkenhayn, was brutally straightforward. Bleed France dry by drawing its forces into a prolonged and exhausting confrontation. Verdun, a site of immense historical and symbolic importance to the French, was chosen deliberately to provoke a response. What followed was a nearly 10-month ordeal marked by ceaseless artillery bombardments, hand-to-hand combat, and unimaginable suffering. The casualties on both sides reached staggering numbers, with over 700,000 men killed, wounded, or missing by the end of the battle, yet the front lines remained virtually unchanged, a grim testament to the futility and horror of trench warfare. Every inch of ground was fought over with ferocity as soldiers endured relentless shelling and counterattacks in a grim struggle for survival. The battlefield became a quagmire of mud and blood, where days blurred into nights under the constant thunder of artillery. Trenches collapsed under heavy rain, turning into waterlogged pits filled with debris and bodies. By the end of the battle, over 700,000 men had been killed, wounded, or gone missing, yet despite the unimaginable sacrifices, the front lines remained virtually unchanged, a stark symbol of the futility and horrors of trench warfare. By 1917, the war had reached a grinding stalemate. Both sides were battered and depleted, with trenches stretching endlessly across devastated landscapes. Soldiers were fatigued, supplies were dwindling, and civilian morale was crumbling under the weight of food shortages and unrelenting losses. Then, in April 1917, the United States entered the war, bringing not only fresh troops, but also a surge of optimism and crucial resources. The influx of American soldiers and equipment revitalized the Allied forces, tipping the balance of power and signaling a decisive shift in the course of the conflict. American soldiers brought not only fresh energy, but also a transformative approach to modern warfare. They introduced advanced coordination between infantry, artillery, and air support, which proved critical in breaking the long-standing stalemates on the Western Front. Their logistics network ensured a steady supply of food, weapons, and medical aid, greatly improving conditions for frontline soldiers. Communication systems, including field telephones and radio relays, enhanced battlefield coordination, allowing the Allies to execute complex operations with greater efficiency. Additionally, the sheer scale of American reinforcements, over 2 million troops, bolstered Allied ranks and delivered an undeniable psychological blow to the Central Powers. Their presence reinvigorated the exhausted Allied forces and filled war-weary populations with renewed hope, signaling that a decisive victory was finally within reach. In late 1918, The tide turned decisively as the Central Powers began to unravel under immense pressure from both military defeats and internal strife. Austria-Hungary, plagued by ethnic divisions and widespread unrest, surrendered in October 1918, signaling the disintegration of its empire into several independent states. The Ottoman Empire, weakened by years of conflict and revolts in its territories, also faced defeat and began negotiating an armistice. Germany, isolated and burdened by shortages, strikes, and the spread of revolutionary fervor at home, found itself without allies. By November, the German military was in full retreat, and the nation was on the brink of collapse, leading to the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II and the declaration of a republic. On November 11, 1918, at 11 a.m., the guns fell silent across the battle-scarred landscapes of Europe. After 4 years of relentless bloodshed, the Great War had finally come to an end. Exhausted soldiers emerged from the trenches, their eyes hollow with fatigue and disbelief. Some stared blankly into the distance, too numb to comprehend the magnitude of the moment, while others wept openly, tears of relief, grief, and unspoken sorrow. Church bells tolled across cities and villages, echoing through the streets like a collective sigh of a weary world. In homes and public squares, people hugged and prayed, whispering thanks for the peace they had long feared would never come. The war was over, but its scars, both visible and invisible, would endure for generations to come, forever etched into the hearts and minds of those who survived. World War I left a deep and enduring scar on the world. Over 20 million people, soldiers and civilians alike, lost their lives, while millions more were permanently injured or displaced. The scale of destruction was beyond anything humanity had experienced before, with entire cities reduced to rubble and thriving communities turned into silent, desolate ruins. Streets that once bustled with daily life now lay empty, scarred by bomb craters and the remnants of destroyed buildings. The collapse of long-standing empires, such as the Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires, marked the end of an era and the beginning of political fragmentation. New nations emerged from the ashes, with borders hastily redrawn to reflect the ambitions of victorious powers. This process brought both opportunities and dangers. In Central Europe, countries like Poland and Czechoslovakia celebrated newfound independence and national pride. Meanwhile, in regions such as the Balkans and the Middle East, the redrawing of boundaries without regard for ethnic, cultural, or historical context created a fragile geopolitical landscape. Ethnic tensions simmered beneath the surface, setting the stage for future conflicts that would haunt the world for decades to come. The redrawing of borders created a complex and fragile geopolitical landscape, fraught with both promise and peril. For some ethnic groups, such as the Poles and Czechs, it brought long-awaited independence and a sense of national pride as they established sovereign states. For others, particularly in regions like the Balkans and the Middle East, it sowed seeds of confusion, resentment, and future conflict. Arbitrary lines were drawn by victorious powers with little regard for cultural, linguistic, or historical realities, forcing disparate communities into uneasy coexistence while dividing cohesive groups across new boundaries. This unstable foundation of hastily constructed states and imposed borders would haunt the world for decades to come, fueling nationalist tensions and geopolitical rivalries that repeatedly erupted throughout the 20th century. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, officially ended the war but left a legacy fraught with tension and unresolved grievances. Among its most controversial elements were the punitive reparations imposed on Germany and the infamous Article 231, known as the War Guilt Clause, which placed sole blame for the conflict on the nation. These terms humiliated the German people, deeply wounding their national pride and crippling their already fragile economy. The reparations demanded were astronomical, creating hyperinflation, economic chaos, and widespread unemployment that devastated everyday life in Germany. This pervasive sense of injustice and betrayal became fertile ground for the rise of political extremism. Radical ideologies gained traction, exploiting national resentment and promising to restore Germany's honor and strength. Within 2 decades, these unresolved tensions would culminate in an even more devastating conflict, World War II. Beyond the political consequences, the human cost was staggering. Millions of families were torn apart, their lives forever changed by loss and trauma. Soldiers who returned home faced a new battle, reintegrating into a society that often could not understand what they had endured. Many struggled with debilitating psychological wounds. PTSD, then known as shell shock, manifested in severe anxiety, nightmares, and emotional detachment, haunting them for the rest of their lives. For some, these invisible scars made it impossible to find peace, while others found solace in shared experiences with fellow veterans or creative outlets such as writing and art. The trauma of World War I reshaped art, literature, and culture, leaving an indelible mark on creative expression that resonated far beyond the battlefield. Writers like Wilfred Owen and Erich Maria Remarque vividly captured the brutal realities of war, exposing the psychological and physical toll on soldiers in ways the world had never seen before. Owen's poignant poetry, filled with raw emotion and haunting imagery, laid bare the futility and suffering of trench warfare. Similarly, Remarque's groundbreaking novel All Quiet on the Western Front offered a stark, unflinching portrayal of the soldier's experience, bringing readers into the chaos and despair of the front lines. These works not only memorialized the experiences of those who fought, but also sparked a broader cultural reckoning. Painters like Otto Dix and George Grosz depicted the horrors of war through surreal, grotesque imagery that challenged conventional aesthetics, while filmmakers and playwrights explored themes of disillusionment and loss. This artistic response to World War I influenced a generation of artists, thinkers, and anti-war activists, ensuring that the memories and lessons of the conflict would endure for decades to come. Lessons for the future. World War I was a stark reminder of the catastrophic consequences of unchecked nationalism, militarism, and alliances built on mutual suspicion and fear. The war laid bare the fragile nature of international relations and the devastating costs of unresolved tensions. It taught us the vital importance of diplomacy, international cooperation, and the relentless pursuit of peace to prevent such horrors from recurring. Even today, the echoes of World War I linger, influencing global politics, cultural memory, and our understanding of conflict. The sacrifices made by millions stand as a solemn reminder of the high cost of war and the urgent necessity of striving for a better, more peaceful world. Every monument, every memorial serves as a call to action, to learn from the past, to build bridges rather than walls, and to ensure that the lessons of history guide us toward lasting peace. World War I was a stark reminder of the catastrophic consequences of unchecked nationalism, militarism, and alliances built on mutual suspicion and fear. The war laid bare the fragile nature of international relations and the devastating costs of unresolved tensions. It taught us the vital importance of diplomacy, international cooperation, and the relentless pursuit of peace to prevent such horrors from recurring. Even today, the echoes of World War I linger, influencing global politics, cultural memory, and our understanding of conflict. The sacrifices made by millions stand as a solemn reminder of the high cost of war and the urgent necessity of striving for a better, more peaceful world. Every monument, every memorial serves as a call to action, to learn from the past, to build bridges rather than walls, and to ensure that the lessons of history guide us toward lasting peace. The story of World War I is not just a tale of battles and treaties. It's a human story of bravery and tragedy, of resilience and loss. As we reflect on this dark chapter in history, we must carry its lessons with us and honor the memory of those who lived, fought, and died. For only by remembering can we ensure that such a catastrophe never happens again. If you found this story inspiring and educational, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more engaging stories. By joining us, you'll expand your vocabulary and improve your English skills in a professional and enjoyable way. See you in the next video.